Hey, this is Ewan Blakey, and with Christy, my wife, we're the pastors of Oasis Church, and this is our podcast. I wanted to thank you for joining us today. I hope this inspires you. I hope it builds your faith. I hope it gives you perspective to see God is moving in your life. Enjoy the message.
Today's focus is looking at making room for discipleship and then making room for discipleship of others, how we can go about that. And what we're going to cover is why it's important, like why Jesus put such an emphasis on it, how Jesus did it, and then what stops us from doing it and how we can step into it. So, so let's start with the invitation, how this all begins for all of us and how it began in Matthew 4:19. The slide coming up. And Jesus, walking along by the shore, said to two disciples, and he just said, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people." So these guys left their nets and left their father and left their business and went after Jesus and followed him. That was how the rabbi would call in that time would call these disciples to them, and then they would journey with them and learn from them. They'd be observing them, immersed in their life. And the important point here is that the first point really about this was, and it is for us, an invitation to communal life with the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So this is a community of God, which is this community of love, this incredible relationship that's outworking the kingdom purposes on earth. And we have been invited into that relationship. And so the other part of it is that we're also invited into the communal part of the church. So as soon as the disciples followed after Jesus, they were immediately caught up into community. They were immediately joined with other disciples and then were really forming and birthing the church. And so the important thing about that is that we need to understand that that's a stark contrast to our cultural context today. The cultural context today, and there's just a quote, this is from Richard Foster. He says, "Superficiality is the curse of our age. The desperate need today is not for more intelligent or gifted people, but for deep people." And so the work of Christ, when he called people to him, was to take them from maybe having their focus on fishing and doing certain other things and being very busy tending the nets. There's calling them out from that and then calling them into a deep discipleship where he's going to reveal who he is, and then he's also going to reveal who they really are in him. And that's a deep work. That's not a superficial, maybe try and do it while I'm rushing through life at breakneck speed, experiencing hurry sick and all the other symptoms of modern life. What it was he was really showing the disciples how they could make room in their hearts, in their world, and in their day and their week, so that there was enough of a crack that God could get his grace in there and then do something radical. I don't know about you guys, but what I experience for me is sometimes when I'm thinking about joining a Connect group, setting aside 15 minutes to sit down in a particular designated place in our home and have time just quiet before God, before everything's going to happen. Sometimes I tend to focus only on what I'm going to do and vastly underestimate what God can do and will do. And it's just an important distinction when I'm, it's a bit like going to the gym or going out for a run. Sometimes my focus lies on the discomfort or maybe some of the limitations and not look at actually what builds over time. And then from a kingdom point of view, what God will do in you and through you by just offering those small spaces. So what we do see in this contemporary culture is hyper-individualism. We're very much molded by Western Greek thought. So it's very much my life, it's kind of hyper-individualism. What do I want from this? How's this going to work for me? Superficial connection. It's very like high fives and, busy sort of rushing through. And how's your week been? Not really hanging around. I haven't got really time to hear, but great. That kind of interaction. Autonomy obsessed. The idea that, well, it's my life. I'll kind of do things how I want, when I want, and if I want. That kind of thought. consumer-driven mentality. These are all challenges, I don't know about you, but definitely seep in and can impact my attitude or our attitude to life, and even our interaction within our relationship with God. And of course, the other aspect is things like the contemporary aspects of liquidity. So that's like finance, where I have to pursue certain financial goals that I may have to make decisions that will impact my life. It will shape my life. And a lot of that's very necessary. But again, the way I pursue that will have an impact. Social media and algorithms will also have a shaping impact. And what we find is that Paul, when he wrote to the Romans, what he said in Romans 12:2, he said, "Do not any longer conform to the pattern of this world." And the importance about it is understanding that the pattern of the world is self. That's the pattern of the world. And the pattern of the kingdom is self-sacrificial. It's Christ-centered. It's opening to God. It's opening to others. And so these are all the challenges we're all faced with, we all wrestle with. And formation, the important point here is that formation is always happening, whether we're aware of it or not. And we're either being formed towards Christ or with Christ, and at times we can be formed away from Christ. And there's pressures and things that can develop that pushes away. So our challenge really, and there's good news coming, but our challenge in this is that it's the difference between drift versus maybe intention. So there can be that drift versus that intentional, actually, I'm aware of all these challenges, I'm aware of all these things that are sort of molding me and working on me, but I'm going to actually intentionally carve out some time that I know is not going to be subject to this. I'm going to anchor myself in that. The other part of it that we can also do is go from agreement to action. So we can agree so often, we can hear, yeah, that's right, and we can agree and feel like the work's done, but actually Jesus didn't call us to agree with him, he called us to follow him. So there's a big distinction there. And the Jesus way of formation is it's paradoxical. Certain things he asks us to do don't seem like they're going to lead to life, but they actually lead to the life that we really deep down want. And he says that when he says, take up your cross and follow me. Like there's that embracing of the difficult, the embracing of laying down our lives. And then what flows from that is the life that we actually really want. And Jesus shows us a much better way. He shows us self-sacrificial way, a deeply relational way, a way that's actually available and relating. He shows us a communal way that's a gathering, making time for gathering. It's spirit-filled. And so as we say, we're not going to drift into this. We need to make room and make intention. And so much of it is noise, distractions, and striving. What we need to rest in is also that this isn't something that we're kind of arm wrestling Jesus do in us, or that we've got to strive to do for us. The important thing about the formation and the disciplines and making room is that in itself isn't what's going to transform and shape us and grow us. It's the Spirit of God. It's his work in us. So they make room, but it's the Spirit of God that actually does it. It's the right connection that makes the difference. And so the important thing around that is that we need to kind of carve out where there's less noise, less distraction, and make room for that. So the current context, squeezes our relationship vertically with God for those sort of devotional moments. And it also can squeeze out our on the horizontal with each other. It can really squeeze that out. And I don't know about you, I'm Gen X, so I was kind of around when it went from pre-digital to digital. I mean, I did my whole undergrad degree with no computer, all longhand. My arm nearly fell off. I was doing a dissertation as well. It was crazy. And then when I was doing postgrad, it was kind of funny. It was about 20 or 30 of us in this cohort, and they were sending an email And how many of you are receiving email? One person, it was like a real techie guy, put his hand up. The rest of us were all like, no, put it in the mail. We don't know what that is. And so we would bridge that. I got my first mobile phone when I had to be on call, and I was just, everyone's like, oh, wow, you know. It was just such a funny time, just navigating that. And I remember coming out to Australia and going to a phone box to, you know, do the long distance call and, oh, is this line good or not? And, you know, going to an internet cafe, remember those? And just those funny times, you know, and just on dial-up and sending an email to a few mates. And it was just a funny time. But it's interesting that technology is great in so many ways, but it also brings challenges, right? Same with social media, it's great, but it also brings challenges. There's all these things that are not, you know, they're not exclusively like good or bad, they just bring different elements. So what we do see, though, is it's getting more and more challenging, I think, is how I feel. I don't know about you guys, but it is challenging. But I think what I do know is the Great Commission was for us to go and make disciples. And the enemy, Satan, he just wants us decommissioned. It's as simple as that. He just wants that commission killed. Pretty easy. He just goes, right, I'm just going to make you everything really noisy, super distracting. I'm going to make you busy, hurry, sick, and I'm going to use whatever leverage I can. That might be whatever we feel is a well-lived life, an aspiration towards that may contrast to what the kingdom says. It may be just getting really busy with lots of elements so that we suddenly go, oh, hang on, we haven't really connected as husband and wife, or, oh, we haven't really managed to get to connect group, or whatever it might be. But he wants you decommissioned. And it's a fight. As Paul wrote to Timothy, fight the good fight of faith. And the good thing is God's right in the middle of that with us. So when we lean in intentionally, God's right in the middle of that with us. And there's a cost to discipleship. You know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer shared about, he was pushing back on the idea of cheap grace, you know, just accepting Christ and then just leaning back and receiving grace and then not really paying any sort of sense of a price for following Christ. But Dallas Willard, he came with this quote and he said, the cost of discipleship is high, but the cost of non-discipleship is even higher. And it can cost you the abundant life Jesus came to bring. So the key thought here is there's no wiggle room. It's going to cost us something. And it's just a matter of whether we're going to lean into the cost of being formed and shaped to be disciples. And then, like the opposite of what the enemy wants, if we're being formed, there's a prospect we can form others and be part of reaching them as the original Matthew 4:19. Jesus wants you discipled so that you can disciple others. That's the goal for him in terms of how the kingdom's built. And so the enemy's plan is the opposite. He just knows if you're not going to get discipled, if you don't make room for Jesus to get discipled, he's killed two birds with one stone. And he's like, you beauty. So it's just worth paying attention to that. And we need to understand, we need to ask ourselves the question is, who's well off in life? It's an important thing to ask. It's something you can ask your kids around the meal table and hear the response. Dallas Willard pointed to the teachings on the kingdom about who's well off. And it contrasts quite differently when you open scripture and you look at what they say about who's well off, irrespective of the cultural time. If you look, you'll find that the kingdom points to different people and a different approach to life that is actually well off, as opposed to when I'm, if I get into the rhythm of scrolling through social media and it's all like wellness, buying 1 billion houses, getting a six-pack, it's just kind of the whole thing. Stark contrast between what we get fed culturally. And as I shared before, at Legacy, there's 3 spaces that Jesus modeled. So there's solitude with the Father, there's that Jesus saw, and then there's our solitude, that time where we can just pray, open our heart to God, and just ask Him to do a work in us, but also just sit with Him. There's so much happens, I think, that we don't always understand, but God is doing it. And probably the challenge is not to kind of rate that quiet time, Like, oh, that was a 10. No, that was that was a 2. Because it's tempting to do that, right? To go, is this working? Am I getting anywhere? Is it just me? I do the whole time where I'm like, oh, I'm not sure where that went well, but yeah. But the interesting thing was one time. I mean, a small testimony in that was I spent some time looking at the cross, and it was in a connect group setting, and I was doing it with other people, and I wasn't leading this particular group. But what I was doing was really seeking God's heart around the cross. And this doesn't happen all the time, but what happened was I had this most remarkable, unprompted encounter with God. And it was so powerful. I was eating breakfast. It was goat's yogurt and muesli. I think for some reason I'm remembering. But anyway, we were eating at the table, and the power of God came upon me to such an extent where there was 3 worship songs being played, and when it got to the 3rd worship song, and they all referenced the cross, and it was just, I had one of the most overwhelming, radical encounters with God I've ever had. And Kristen thought I was having a heart attack. I dropped the bowl, and I just had tears streaming, and I was in such a daze. I was dazed for the whole day, like literally days. And then I walked out to this acreage property we had, and I had to mark out where they were going to put this fence. And I remember just being just like absolutely, I was just so overwhelmed by the power of God. And I put all these posts in the ground that I had to mark out. It was around about an acre of this particular big paddock. And they were, the interesting thing was they were all exactly in the right spot, funnily enough. But the interesting thing was, when I was doing the study, I didn't feel like anything significant was really happening. And I didn't really seek to have that encounter, particularly at that time. But it's just an instance of where you don't really know what God's going to do in response to just carving out that time. And so I'd encourage you, please, make that time for that first space. It's so important. It can just be... it's really hard though, isn't it? If you're a mum and you've got 4 kids and you've got 2 under 2 or something like that, really hard to do. But even just 5 minutes, whatever you can offer God will honor and bless you with. So the 3 areas is solitude with the Father, community with the 12, and gathering in the temple. Jesus modeled each of these 3. And what was really, so for us, that would represent like that devotional quiet time. The community with the 12 will be like our connect group where we get together, and then gather in the temple like this. Those 3 elements offer solitude, intimate community, and then congregational gathering. And what we see in Acts 2:42 to 47 is this forming of the early church, where Jesus is post-resurrected, they were baptized in the power of the Holy Spirit, and then they're gathering. And then Peter has preached a sermon, and 3,000 men, and then lots of other people, because they only counted the men in those days, thousands came to faith, and the church was being birthed in power and prayer. And it says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many signs and wonders performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were saved. So what we see, and just briefly in this, is firstly they devoted themselves. So straight away they were taking ownership of their faith. It was kind of like, no, this is my deal. When we look at the miracles that were happening, the interesting thing is there's different stats that I was looking, but essentially the vast majority of the miracles were actually done outside the church walls. So it's not that the church isn't important, but it's just to understand there's more that God wants to do and did in the early church outside the walls. It was something like 39 out of the 40 miracles. There was unity and diversity. So it's interesting, you had people coming from all over who were being added to their number and hearing languages spoken in all different languages, but yet they were brought together in complete unity. the interesting thing is, like in a connect group setting, when you get pulled together, you'll be pulled together with people who are not really necessarily like you. And that's a really great thing, because God will do his best work in those situations. And what we've got, we had the zealot and the tax collector together with the 12 disciples. So that's like a zealot's kind of like, basically looking to take down the Roman regime. And then the tax collector's basically collaborating with the regime. So I would imagine they would have some interesting interactions in that space. Radical generosity, it points to the idea of we need to be able to come to even a service like this ready to give, ready to have something to pour out. And daily connection, so we see there's a commitment to be at the table and the temple. There was a commitment to being in this gathering and also in connect groups, like in a discipleship group. And God added to their number daily. And what we see is as they were being discipled, the God was able to add to their number and then see those be discipled and sent out. And I just want to highlight just the temple and the table. When we talk about the table, I think in a way, when you read through the Gospels, we see how elevated the table was, sharing meal times in the Gospels and and all the way through Scripture, and particularly in the Gospels, we see that this space was where Jesus often invited Zacchaeus into that space. Simon the leper, Simon the Pharisee. There was lots of people where it was just this amazing space to have intimacy, connection, conversation. Eating is a sign of friendship and a sign of being nourished and nourishing each other. And what I would say is shared meals, it's a space for gratitude, it's a space for prayer, it's a space for hospitality, to experience kindness, encouragement. It's a place for confession. It's a place for joy and laughter, prophetic encouragement, testimony, peacemaking, communion, invitation, and welcome. And so if you're not experiencing that, it's a great space to step into. And whether that's at Connect Group or whether that's outside of Connect Group, it's just a real holy space. And I feel like often the church could reclaim that space and elevate that space in the communal life. It would really make such a great difference. The other thing that makes room for some wonderful things for God to do is humility. You see, what humility says is that I need God, and it's the understanding of who God is and who I am and my relationship with him and just my need of him and our need of him. And it also recognizes that we need each other in life. It's just a reality. There's no self-made people, and anybody that's accomplishing anything in life, it's done as a result of just the help and connection and support and collaboration and contribution of so many people. And so in 1 Peter 5:5 it says, all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And humility creates space for God to move. It creates room for others to be welcome. And it really offers growth and transformation. And often when we've been in that communal space, or we've been in church life, or if we've not yet stepped into that, what's assured is that often we can have experienced some hurt. Like doing life with people, whether it's with our families, our friends, or just the wider world and church. Relational hurt is a real thing. And so humility makes room for healing. Humility is really an openness before God to bring things to him and identify things that have caused a barrier between us and other people, or stepping into relationship, or even trying again in that space and stepping out. So, Your Move Sunday, we're talking about connect groups. So, in talking about connect groups, the reason they matter is because it's the model. It's kind of Jesus's model. He pulled people into like smaller groups, and he did that for relationship. He intended to be intentional, relational, and accountable. And at Oasis, we have a pathway here, and it's kind of built on these steps, which is to find life, grow, and make a difference. And Connect Group is the perfect place to walk those steps out, to find life, to grow together, and then make a difference. Because Connect Groups can seem quite inward focused, but the reality is they're designed so that we'll go and make disciples and invite them into that space and help them find relationship. And we do that in His power, not in ours. So He's already at work in the hearts of people all around us, our work colleagues, our friends, people at the supermarket who might see regularly, or whoever it is. He's at work continually. And what He's looking for is a space where we make room to receive people, and then people can be added daily to their number. We had Dr. Ali Cawthorne. I had the privilege of doing Immersion Academy with her, which is a deep dive into discipleship with Ali. And it was just really quite incredible. And she just really a few weeks ago shared a message. It's a great one to scoot back to and have a listen to. But she really identified the fact that we need each other, that what you carry is there for somebody else, for God to do something with. And that is a continual dynamic. And it's amazing how often you'll find you will just share a passing, a bit of, this is how God moved in my life, and it will really, it'll be the very thing that God wants to speak into that person's heart and life and bring healing and release and empowerment. So don't underestimate what's missing if you are not there. So I'd encourage you about Connect Group. And what we know is we want to set our sails, these disciplines and spaces. It's a bit like setting the sail, and then when the wind of the Spirit moves, then we get direction. And it's an important thing. And in terms of time and energy, it is difficult in this current context we're grappling with. But what I would say is there's a great illustration. For time purposes, I don't have it. Like there was a clip, but it didn't quite, it would take quite a while. But it was popularized by Stephen Covey, and it has a big jar. And some of you may have seen this, but it's something you can Google and check out. And what it is Stephen Covey is, he's very much around time, and, he's quite an interesting guy. He's passed away now. He wrote 7 Habits of the Highly Effective People. And it was quite a groundbreaking book in organizational leadership and that kind of thing. But what he illustrated was the order in which you put things into the big jar. So if you picture a big jar, and then there's big rocks, smaller rocks, sand and water. And these are priorities. And you get to decide what's a big rock. That's the good part. And you get to decide these things. But what he does is gets the big jar and then starts putting sand and a few pebbles and then a few small rocks, and then realizes he can't get the big stuff in, can't get the big rocks. And then illustrates the other way. Gets a jar, puts the big rocks in, they all fit, and then the smaller rocks, then the sand, and then pours water in. And it all just fits. And it's the same substance. But it's the encouragement in that is that we need to, number one, work out the priorities. What's the big thing got to go in first? And I know that for me, what I'm wrestling with and what I'm trying to do, and I think what Jesus teaches us to do, it said, seek first the kingdom and everything else will be added. So what we look to do is, I remember when I came to faith, I'm first generation Christian. I just thought, I am going to go to church, I'm going to join a Connect group, and I'm going to endeavor to carve out some time with God. And I've struggled with that, at times. But on the whole, that rhythm has been worked out, and I've wrestled it back, but there was a commitment to that. So I decided they're the big rocks, and then I'm going to put some other things in there. And then when I find that my jar's filling up with sand and small rocks, I go, right, hang on, I need to do something there. So that's the encouragement in that. So the question really is, am I being formed into Christ, or am I being deformed by some life choices? That's the question I'm often asking myself. Not as a point of condemnation, but as a point of how can I get to freedom? How can I get to the life that Jesus is talking about? How can I make room for grace to move in and through life so that we've got an opportunity to step out and do what God's called us to do? There's a great quote from Ian Simpkins, just in closing. He says, we weren't made to live frantic and fragmented. If your pace is costing you your joy, relationships, or your soul, it's time to pay attention. Your limits aren't a problem to solve. They're an invitation to return to the source, to the true source. You weren't created for a life you don't have time for. Such a powerful quote, because God has created you for abundant life. And so if the worship team would just like to come and join me on stage, what's your next step? You know, this is something that's an ongoing process of carving out room and making room for intentional deep discipleship. But I would just recommend those 3 spaces, just some quiet time, just some time before God. And there's no pressure. For me, sometimes I just sit there, just quiet, just before God, just for like 15 minutes. It might even be an hour, but whatever I've got. And then I may share some things and then just ask God to mold me and shape me and change me, make him how he wants me to be, more like him. It's interesting what comes up in that space. So that's the first space, is that devotional time. Making time for Connect Group. So we have some Connect Group leaders out the front. We've got a foyer area where set aside so that you can go and meet some Connect Group people to take that step into life. There's some leaflets just there, so if you scan them, it'll take you to be able to sign up your interest. But go and chat to them, and there is capacity within our Connect Groups to receive you. You'll bless those groups, and they'll bless you by being a part of that. And then also being a part of Sunday. But what I would like us to do, if we could all just stand, and we're going to sing one more song before we head out and interact with those guys. But the call to action is really about taking the next step. And can I strongly encourage you, what we'd love for you to do is to take that step into Connect Groups, to take that step into intentional discipleship. It might be some of those things you'll talk about together and work out, what does this look like for us as a family? It might be, what does that look like for me as an individual? If you know, and joining a group. But I also want to make room. If we could pray also for healing. If you've experienced like hurt and stepping out and it's not been quite what you thought it would be, interacting with people, it's not been this rich, abundant life. You maybe haven't been received in a way you would like to be received, or you're just aware as I'm talking about this, you feel like there's some but in there about hurt. That's a real thing in life, but also in church life. And it's not something to be ashamed of. It's just something that we can open up and give that opportunity for God to bring healing. But also the other thing I'd like to pray is about just taking that step and meaningful steps into community and into community life and into a Connect group. If that's been a bit of a hurdle for you, that would be just a great thing to pray for.